Welcome along to this next interview with Elaine Power, aka Dyslexic Landlord, one of the top contributors on Property Tribes, and it's great to be able to meet up with Elaine in her hometown of Newcastle. And Elaine, before we started the camera rolling, we were having tea, and I was just so fascinated by everything you were telling me. You've got so much knowledge to share, having been in property since 1982. Wonderful achievement. But one of the things that really interested me was you have what you call your recipe for tenant referencing.
I do.
So obviously this has been honed over many, many years. How do you choose your tenant?
I looked, first of all, I had to go through a possession of a property. And after the bailiff had been and actually put this lady out of this property, who would be quite a lot of money at the time, I came home and I thought, what did I do wrong? Where did I go wrong with this? Why did it end up in the court? And I went to the file and I picked up the file that she filled in, and I was amazed at how little information I bothered to take about her background, where she worked, blah, blah, blah. And I thought, you've got to learn from this. You've got to really take this on board and say, if you're going to do this, you don't need the stress, you don't need the anxiety, and you don't need the monetary loss of having a bad tenant. So I sat down and I thought, I'm going to bring my own little formula together with this. And my formula is this, is that when I have a void property and I have somebody who wants to come and view the property, I show them round.
Right.
And I look at them up and down and think, what do I think to start with? So I do look at the first impressions. After the first impressions, and they say they would like to have the property, I then arrange for them to have an application form, which I haven't got with me.
Right.
So I then go and do a visit to their home, drop off the application, and ask them at that point to let me know when it's finished, completed, and I will come back and pick it up. I then go back to the prospective customer and I sit in their house and I go through the application with them, and I'm then making a judgment on what I think they're like. I'm looking at where they live. I'm looking at how they live.
Yep.
Because in my experience is that the way they live today will be your property in 6 months' time. If it's immaculate, you'll have an immaculate property. If it's a dirty property, you'll have a dirty property. So I then go through that, and I'm building a rapport. I'm assessing them, talking to them, and then I ask them then for a guarantor. As I don't take deposits, and then they will say yes or no, or they will give me the name of the guarantor, and I do a very similar thing with the guarantor. I go and see them, and I sit down and I outline to them in the living rooms what a guarantor means, what their obligations are. And since I've used this recipe of taking a little bit of time to sit down and talk to somebody in their own home, and getting information, I haven't had to go to court. It's worked. And that says it all for me. It's just the way I do it.
So it's your own recipe, as we said. Now, if we could go back to when the tenant comes for the viewing, you mentioned that you kind of do look at first impressions. Would that be things like if they arrive on time, if they're, easy to talk to, if they're happy to answer questions?
Yes, I mean it's like talking to somebody at a bus stop. You're talking to somebody and you're making a picture of them in your head. Oh, that seems a nice person. That seems a bit dodgy, or whatever. I've had some strange experience. I've had drunks turn up.
Yep. So that would be a no.
I've had who I thought were probably high on drugs. That's definitely a no. And so yes, so I am making a judgment. Now I may get that judgment wrong. They could be a lovely person, but I just go by what my gut feeling tells me.
Yeah.
If I feel it's not right and it's not fun, I will then say, the property's gone, you've just missed it. But I'll keep you on the list and let them down gently that way. But I think taking a tenant is a bit like employing somebody.
Yeah.
You've got to interview them and you've got to try and get into the skin a little bit and find out what's not quite as good as the first tell you it is. And you'll only do that by spending time building that rapport and that foundation. But the great thing is once you've been through all of that, and that person moves into your property, they will invite you in because they know you. You've already started it off. So you can sit in the new living room and look at the ducks on the wall and pat the dog, and they will talk to you. And I think it's all about, I think there's a fear of landlords, which people can have, quite rightly so, this big nasty landlord who they don't know, who they've got no information from, who just wants the rent every week via an agent. And I find that's not the way I work. That's the way I prefer not to work. I prefer to know the person and literally. And there's times when I've got old tenants, particularly, I cut gardens. I go around the lawnmower and I cut the garden for them. And again, it's you are getting to know your customer, and they're getting to know you, and it works. And they will then, this is the beauty, they will then pass you on when you get a void to a friend, whoever it might be.
No, that makes perfect sense. Now, there's certain demographic of tenant you won't take from, born out of all your experience over many, many years. Now, we're not saying that this is right for everybody, because it will depend on your area where you're investing and the type of property you have and the tenant demographic that you're going for. But certainly in the Newcastle area, there's certain tenant demographic that works very well for you and others that you're not so keen on.
I looked at my arrears book and tried to find out a common denominator. The common denominator I found was it was single people under the age of 30 who weren't working.
They cause problems.
They were more likely to fall into arrears and cause me problems regarding as a landlord regarding arrears. Not necessarily in bad behaviour, but in being a little bit conscious of paying their rent and not being, if it's, the DHSS will pay you, so therefore I need to not worry. Where if you get an older person, a mother with children, they tend to be a lot more proactive regarding this. They will manage it and they'll budget better, what have you. So it's, I would take no problem a single male or a single woman who is working. That is not an issue. But for universal credit, or what was called HSS, I don't take, because I just don't think it's the place for me to be.
No, fair enough. Now, you mentioned you don't take deposits, and I'm interested because, I do. I think they my view is you're handing over your prize asset to somebody. You want them to have a little bit of the skin in the game, so to speak. Why don't you take deposits? Was that a lesson that you learned, or just a strategy that just worked for you?
I listened at landlord meetings to other landlords who were having problems with the tenancy deposit scheme, the bureaucratical problems. Go and talk to your tenant. Well, I can't because it's disappeared. This sort of thing. And I looked at it and I thought, well, my average rent's probably £500 a month, something like that. And I thought, I'll take a £500 bond. What does a £500 actually bond cover me for? It covers me for maybe a base or a bath or something like that. It doesn't go very far. And I thought, I'm getting myself tied up here into a bureaucratical system to which, if I come back to this, get to know my customer, get to know what they, how they take and what they do. Do I really need that £500? If I've got the guarantor, if I've got the guarantor and something goes wrong, and it does, it has done, I have used guarantors, the difference between that and having a tenancy deposit scheme is marked, because you've got somebody who you can go and knock on their door and say, I'm having a problem with your nephew, your son or whatever, he's not paying his rent. I can guarantee they are on the phone to that person saying, pay the rent. So it comes back to my recipe. That's why I don't use it. It isn't fit for purpose for what I do. Right. But I totally understand that many landlords will use it, but I don't.
No, that makes perfect sense. When, in respect of the guarantor, do they have to be a homeowner?
I prefer a homeowner, but it doesn't have to be. And to be fair, if you're picking the right tenant, the guarantor more than likely is never going to come into the picture. And I have taken them where they've been tenants themselves, working. But what I do, and I have done this before, when I've got bring a tenant and a guarantor together and say, now listen, they're putting their signature for you. Don't you let them down. Again, it comes down to that again.
No.
It's getting to know your customer and understanding your customer.
No, I totally get that. And one thing that I always say is, when taking on a new tenant, is get their next of kin.
Absolutely.
Because we've had a tenant that became very ill after they were bitten by a spider on holiday, of all things, and they became unconscious. We had no contact for them. The hospital were asking us. We didn't know. And also, obviously, if they default on the rent, it's a line of inquiry. So I can see that having the guarantor, having gone to their house, know where they live, met them, that gives you a line of inquiry if there is some issue with the tenant.
That's correct. That's absolutely right. Again, it's the same as the right to rent checks.
Yeah.
I think in general they're a good idea because it makes the landlord collect the evidence of a passport or driving licence, a government letter, or whatever you're going to take, a bank statement, and it's giving you a little bit more information about them as well.
Yeah.
So I think I think before the rent checks came in, I probably wasn't taking as much as I should have done, where right to rent made me do that. But on hindsight, I think it's a good idea.
No, I do as well. So just as we finish, DL, you mentioned gut instinct. I think it's very important in being a landlord, and certainly from my own experience over 15 years, whenever I've gone against it, it's actually not worked out very well for me. Do you really, really trust your gut instinct? And have you ever gone against it and found that it did work, or that your gut instinct was right?
I'm sure I've been wrong. And I've never got it all correct. But this is a numbers game.
Yeah.
And you've got to try and stack the cards for your benefit. And even if you're getting it wrong, out of maybe doing 10 tenancies, you've only got one wrong, not 9 others. The other 9 are right. So yes, I think gut instinct is important. And I think it's a human instinct, which comes across and says, do I trust that person? Do I want that person? And never be afraid as a landlord to say no. And I do this going through the recipe, if I think things are not going quite the way they should be, I will not hesitate and pull the plug and say no. I would much rather have an empty property and pay the council tax than have the wrong person in there that's going to make my life difficult.
No. And as we always say, the best way never to have a bad tenant is never to let one step over the threshold in the first place. And you get the odd red flag, don't you? Like a tenant will say, oh, I don't want you to come and visit me at home, or that would be a red flag to you.
I've had where people have said, oh, this is going to be my guarantor, but they don't want to see you.
Yeah.
And I think, well, why is that? What's going on there that they don't want to do this? And again, if you've got an operation in the army, they call it a standing operations procedure. If you do an SOP on everything you do and you stick with that, and you don't tend to waver from it, the chances are it's going to save you along the line. It's very easy to say, oh, I know somebody down the pub who's got a mate who wants this house, and they're really nice people, and what have you, and you will. I did that in the very beginning. And that's where I made my mistakes. And now you've got to be a lot more professional.
No.
To keep this going. If you're professional and get it right, get this bit right, you will probably have a happy tenancy.
Yes, no, I totally agree. One thing I will say just to finish, Elaine, is that no matter how robust our tenant referencing processes are, it is a fact of business that, as you said, it's a numbers game. We are going to encounter a rogue tenant somewhere down the line. Yeah. Now, I'm lucky. I think I'm lucky. I've only encountered, I think, 3 in 15 years across multiple properties. But very often on property tribes, we see landlords absolutely up in arms that they've got a tenant not paying the rent. Yes, I understand it's very emotional, it's very stressful. But actually, if we're just being cold hard facts here, it is a business risk, and we should factor encountering a rogue tenant into our business planning. Every
business that you could probably go into will have a problem somewhere. My mum and dad ran shops and they got shoplifting. It's no different. It's somebody who's not going to pay the bill and maybe walk away with some of your stock. Well, they can't walk away with the house, but they can say, I'm not going to pay the rent, and that's when we get the problems. But it's going to happen. So you've got to factor it in, the same as you do your repairs, the same as you do your insurance, the same as you do your CP12s. It's all should be part of your mix of your business plan. And you're not going to get 100% rent for one reason or another. Arrears is just part of that reason.
It is. Well, fantastic wise words from DL there again. And if you've got any questions for DL about her tenant referencing recipe, then do drop them on the thread. But also, we'd like to hear your recipe for referencing tenants, because every landlord's going to develop their own that works for them. So this would be a great thread to share that on. So please do drop your thoughts below. And thank you very much again, DL, for joining me. And we're going to meet up with DL again, where we're going to be putting the world to rights on what's been going on in the private rented sector. So I'm sure you'll be interested to hear her views about that. So stay tuned, more from Dyslexic Landlord coming soon. Thank you, DL.